Hey everybody, this is part of our full-length primetime podcast. You can check it out on Blog Talk Radio, iTunes, YouTube, plenty more. I hope you enjoy.
And Brandon, we are going to move on. We're going to go back to football. We're done with our one basketball topic for the week because some big news happened. And this is a topic brought to you by one of our subscribers, one of our listeners, Matt Williams, coming us with the question, hey, can we get a Florida State topic, please? And Matt, because you said please, we're going to be talking Florida State Seminoles here on the podcast. And Brandon, this is going to be something, we're going to focus this one around the quarterback for the Seminoles.
Wow, that's a surprise.
Second-year quarterback.
We really don't usually focus on the quarterback.
I mean, we didn't just talk about Wimbush at Notre Dame. We didn't just talk about Eason at Georgia, Darnold, Rosen,
yeah, this is
Lamar Action Jackson.
This is something new for us.
Yeah, this is something very new, but it's the most important position. Florida State hasn't had that, to me, that quarterback that leads them to the playoffs since Jameis Winston did it himself. And I'm basically going to just ask the question, is Deondre Francois, almost didn't say that name right, but I got through it, is Francois the guy in his second year to get the Florida State Seminoles back to the playoffs?
Well, he certainly can be, but he's going to have to get better than what he was last year, and he's going to need some help. Mm-hmm. So one of the things, though, that you take a look is I start out with that comment, but you cannot overlook the really good things that he did. If you remember that Ole Miss game to start the season, we were at your house.
Yep.
Because we were finishing up our fantasy football draft. That game was coming on. I was excited to watch it, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is so one-sided. Came roaring back, ended up having a big, big win for...
Dalvin Cook couldn't hang on to the ball that first half.
No, he could not. No, he could not. But a big win for the Seminoles over Ole Miss in that one. And then I think that he just showed a lot of poise throughout the season, but he only completed 58.8% of his passes, missed a lot of open receivers, and in the Garnett and Gold game, looked like he didn't necessarily make any strides forward, but how much can you really put on that spring game? You really can't put a whole lot on there, but you always want to be able to see someone progressing than regressing. So he can do it, but he also lost some receivers. He also lost some big help for him that he had all throughout last season. He lost Travis Rudolph. He lost Bobo Wilson, Kermit Whitfield. All these guys no longer there, and he's going to have to be relying on Nyquan Murray, Auden Tate, all these guys those who were able to play last year, but they weren't in the forefront of what it had been for Florida State football. But that's the thing, is that it's kind of growing together. He also needs his offensive line to step up. No more Dalvin Cook.
And he's now in Minnesota. And he's wearing my purple.
and that's not good, though.
Yeah, he's wearing my purple.
Got Latavius Murray on that team, so he better not be biting into my time with Latavius Murray anyways. So I think that these are all things like that offensive line, that could have been overlooked because Dalvin Cook was able to make his own space, make his own holes. He was able to do a really good job with that. But all those things come into play. So you can't just say, will Deondre Francois be the one to lead them there? He can do it, but he's going to need help. He is going to need help, and I think it really kind of starts on that offensive line. And I'm not saying that they're the worst, but they are definitely going to have to get stronger because he can make some plays, but he's going to need them to help make some too.
Well, and one of the things that I think of is there was an article on ESPN where they basically asked the question of who's going to be this year's Deshaun Watson in the ACC. Who's going to be the one? And the one that they put the best bet on to be this year's Deshaun Watson in the conference is Deondre Francois. And I mean, I kind of look at it and you can draw some comparisons to that. Deshaun Watson, before these past 2 seasons, played a little bit as a freshman, only played in 8 games though, but his first full season at the head of the Clemson Tigers, they only went on to go to the national championship game before losing to Alabama. He comes back for a junior season, and that's when they go ahead and they win the whole thing. His freshman year only played 8 games, completed 67% of his passes, almost 68, and had just under 1,500 yards. But the thing is that what Deshaun Watson did consistently at Clemson, that you mentioned with Francois, that he needs to bump up, completion percentage. Deshaun Watson, 67.9, 67.8, 67 on the dot. Consistency with completion percentage. And 67 is a good percentage for a quarterback getting those passes out there. That's the big thing he's going to be able to do for me, is if he can bump that up, he'll be able to do some good things. Another thing that, to me, he cannot have a game like you mentioned when he came out flat against Ole Miss, because guess who they're playing game number 1 this year, Brandon, at a neutral site? A team that is going to be hungry because they were basically, one play, about 10 seconds, maybe not even that, just a little bit, maybe even a second away from winning a national title, a back-to-back national title. The Roll Tide, Alabama Crimson Tide. There's no way Francois steps into that game on September 2nd and comes out with a win if he plays a first half as bad as he did and as bad as that whole team did against Ole Miss, because Alabama's not going to give up a 28-6 lead like Ole Miss did. They will build on it. Plus, I mean, you look at the only other games he lost last year after, and I'm going to say he because he's the quarterback and we put a microscope over the quarterback. He's got to be able to beat Clemson this year. They almost beat him last year, but guess what? Clemson does not have Mike Williams, does not have Deshaun Watson, and that is only 2 of the big losses that they do not have this year. They also have to go ahead and beat Louisville because Louisville demolished them last year. They cannot let that happen again. And the only other team they lost to, North Carolina, it's a good thing they don't have to see them this year in the regular season. So really, it's come out against Louisville and at least play better than you did last year, and you can't lose to Clemson, especially with how much they lost. Everything else, he's just got to me, complete more passes and come out like he wants this team to be a playoff team from day one, especially with who they're playing on September 2nd.
Ricky, I know that we're talking about Deondre Francois, or that's where the direction we were starting with. Yeah. But I think that again, it can't all be Francois, and their defense is going to have to step up this year. They're really going to have to step up. They really gave up a lot of points last year because that game against Louisville.
63 points.
Yes, Louisville.
That was a blowout.
That wasn't the only type of game that they played where they gave up a lot of points like that. They did that on too many occasions. And it seemed to be against teams who had a quarterback that could run. And that was Lamar Jackson in Louisville. That is Jalen Hurts in Alabama. This defense is going to have to be able to deal with dual threat quarterbacks to be able to be successful. They've got to be able to limit points. They've got to. They won't be able to be in games because no matter how many points Francois can put up, if the defense is giving up more, they will lose. It's just that simple.
Well, not even that.
But I think that you cannot continue to give up that many points. You have to be able to keep your team in it.
And this is where I want to interject, just like you did the last segment, to kind of add to that, is the 4 games that I would say last year where they went up against pretty significant quarterbacks, 2 of which went in the draft this year, Mitchell Trubisky and Deshaun Watson. 37 points, Mitch put up against them. Then you had 37 that Deshaun put up against you. Lamar Jackson put up 63 against you. And then Wilton Spate in Michigan in your bowl game put up 32 against you, and you only won that game by 1, and it took a late resurgence to win that one. So those 4 quarterbacks that I would say are pretty solid quarterbacks, they were giving up at least 35 points or at least 30 points a game.
That's not That's not acceptable. They can't do that. And those are against legitimate good teams and good quarterbacks, but those are against some of their big rivals that they're going to have to try and beat. So they've got to be the ones that defense has got to step up.
And Chad Kelly put 34 on him. I forgot about that. I forgot Chad Kelly was the quarterback Ole Miss.
It's too many. Those are the big games. Those would be the big games that we looked at last year. If we were looking at Florida State and saying, hey, what games does Florida State have on the schedule that we are looking at? Those would be the big games. They were not able to show up for those in the sense of defense. They need that. Especially as Deondre Francois is trying to learn, trying to grow, to give him some confidence. It's going to be nice when he looks up on that scoreboard and sees, hey, they've got 14 points. Hey, the defense has played well today. The other team only has 3. That's what you want to see. Mm-hmm. You don't want to see, oh, you have 14, you're down 28-14. Every once in a while, is that going to happen? Yes. But too much last year. Too many. At least 5 times. At least 5 times. You played 12 games. That's not good.
Well, and that's what it was. It was either, to me, looking at the scoreboard, it was either one of 2 things for Florida State. Either the offense put up points, but, guess what? The defense couldn't stop a nosebleed. Or it was, wow, defense kept them pretty low scoring. Oh, wait, that's right. The offense didn't put up points either. And it's like, we look at those games that we mentioned. How about the other ones? Miami. They beat them by 1 point, 20-19, and really they beat them on a blocked PAT. That's what it came down to, a big defensive play. Offense didn't put up a ton of points like they did in previous games. We also look at, you look at the North Carolina State game on the road, 24-20. Another close game. That's an opponent that they should beat. Now, they did have other games. I want to give them credit. Charles Southern. You had South Florida, Boston College, Syracuse, even the Florida game where they blew out their opponent. They won by big totals. But there's just too many games. I mean, you take Michigan, Clemson, Louisville, North Carolina. I'm going to throw Ole Miss. That's 7. And then the 2 I mentioned with Miami and North Carolina State, that's 8 of your games. That's most of your games are close games. And I mean, looking at the schedule that they're going to have this upcoming year, Alabama, I'm sorry, that's a loss. Well, at least at this point, I'm calling it a loss because there's not many teams that are going to go up against the Crimson Tide that I'm going to say, yeah, they could beat them. I didn't even think Clemson could beat them last year. That's how good this team is. And really, it's one of those things where this team, this Alabama team, you want to know how good they are? They lose guys. They just lost guys, Brandon. And I'm not worried about it because they just keep churning. They just keep churning new guys. And we talked about Jalen Hurts. We're going to talk about him on the last segment. Another guy, yeah, he loses O.J. Howard, but you know who he didn't lose? Bo Scarborough in the back, who's going to have a big breakout year this year, is going to carry that team, in my opinion. Miami, that's going to be a tough game because Miami's going to remember that 1 point loss. And I want those Miami-Florida State games to carry the same weight that they did in the 90s, where that's the one thing I feel like I want that rivalry to come back, and I feel like that's going to happen this year. Miami's not gonna want to lose that game, especially twice in a row. You get North Carolina State again, where I'm only bringing it up because you only beat them by 4 points. You get Louisville at home this year. You get Clemson without Deshaun Watson. And then you get Florida again, this time at the Swamp in Florida. They're not going to want to lose to you again. And the new team that you see this year, a team that you ragged on in the first segment, the Duke Blue Devils on the road. And I know they're a basketball school. They're not a football school, but they're a team where they've either been good or bad these past few years. It's like, what do they want to be? And with Florida State, it all starts with the beginning. It all starts because you get Alabama to start the gate, and then your first ACC game is your rival in Miami. So it's one of those things where if you're Deondre Francois, if you're this defense, if you're this entire Jimbo Fisher-led squad, you got to be ready to go from the first game, from that first snap. You got to be ready to go, because if you lose 2 of those first 3 games, we might not be talking playoffs with you if you lose to Alabama and Miami.
Well, Ricky, let me throw this back over on you and get it back to Deondre Francois.
Okay.
What do you think? Do you think that he's going to be able to do it? Do you think that he's going to be able to have enough on this offense that's going to be a little new, have a little bit of a new look, no Dalvin Cook anymore, a wide receiver core turning over a bit from guys who were starting, guys who were still there, going to have to step up. You got a new running back, Francois' second year. You've got an offensive line that needs to get better. You've got a defense that needs to be better against the pass. All these things, can Francois be the guy that picks them up and carries them there?
He's going to have to be. And the reason why at this point I'm going to say no to your overarching question is the fact that I look at this team and I look at the schedule that they have to play. If they lose to Alabama, because right now, I'm sorry, Florida State fans, because I feel like I'm putting you in an 0-1 hole before the season even starts.
You feel like you are.
But odds are you're going to be in a 1-0 hole before the season starts. A loss to Alabama doesn't kill your season. But a loss to Alabama says we gotta win our division. We got to win the ACC to even have a shot, and we might have to go perfect the rest of the year just to be able to do that. A near perfect season for Florida State is a loss to Alabama, and then they win everything else. That is like the perfect season for Florida State. But at the absolute best, right now, at this point in the year, as we get into spring before we hit summer, I don't see them beating Alabama. I don't see them beating Louisville. Every other game I see as a winnable game. Miami will be close. North Carolina State I don't think is close this year. Deondre Francois, and the main reason why I ultimately think that this Florida State team is not going to reach the playoffs this year with him behind the helm. And this isn't a they need someone else behind the helm. I just don't think it's going to happen this year. Is I do not see the same fire that I saw with Jameis Winston. I don't see that. I mean, Florida State fans can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that Ole Miss game that we talked about, who was at that game? Jameis Winston. Who went into the locker room to give a pep talk to his old team? Jameis Winston. And Florida State fans, you can correct me if I am wrong. That's not Deondre Francois. And that's the one thing that this team is missing at the quarterback position. And for all the 2 years that I hated Jameis Winston's guts at Florida State for his off-the-field issues, for the years that I couldn't stand him, the one thing I have to give him props for in college was he knew how, and he still knows how, to rally the troops. When the troops are down and they're hanging their head and it's like, well, I guess this one's a loss, Jameis Winston was the guy to pick everyone back up and say, no, not so fast. This isn't over till we say it's over. And have those inspirational speeches to, like I said, pick up the troops. I don't see that in Francois. And topple that with a completion percentage that is below what I want to see in a quarterback. I'm not saying he's a bad quarterback, but it's that little intangible that I'm saying it's not the same. It's not the same that it was with Jameis Winston. And without that little one thing, I'm going to say Florida State does not go to the playoff this year.
Well, then to kind of wrap it up, then I'll ask you one final question.
Okay.
And it's, okay, they don't do it this year. is the name Florida State up towards the top? Are we talking in the top 10? Are we saying, oh, they were almost a playoff team, and then in years to come, are we putting them in there? Are we saying, hey, there's going to be progress made? We're going to see progress this year. They may not be there, but their name's going to be higher at the top, towards the top of the list. And the year after, they're going to be even closer, possibly make it. What are we thinking? If you have to vision down the road, what are you seeing?
At the absolute, like this season, at the absolute worst, like the worst I see this record being is a 4-loss team. Like the only losses right now I would have for Florida State are, if I had to go like, Ricky, give me the most losses I'll have, Alabama, Louisville, Clemson, and Miami. So 4 losses. At the absolute best, I see them 1 or 2 losses, Alabama, Louisville. I think that Clemson game and that Miami game are the 2 flip-flopper kind of games where they could be wins, they could be losses. Louisville, they blew you out last year, and they still got Lamar Action Jackson. So you ain't swaying me until I see you play that game and I see you beat Louisville. And Alabama, I'll put you in an 0-1 hole because Alabama's that good, especially day one. I mean, USC thought they were going to get the best of Alabama opening day. Not a chance, not a chance. We're not even talking about Max Brown anymore. That's what Alabama did to that USC quarterback situation. But the big question that answers that is what happens to Deondre Francois at the end of the year. Because he's a redshirt senior, or not senior, a redshirt sophomore, pardon me. And because he would have redshirt freshman, redshirt sophomore season, he's going to have an interesting decision to make at the end of the year. Go pro or come back for a junior season. If he comes back for a junior season, I want to lean towards the Florida State's right there at like 8, 9, 10 in the preseason AP. And we're like, yeah, they've got a shot to win the ACC because Lamar Action Jackson will not be there. He won't be there. I mean, Clemson, it'll all depend on which quarterback emerges this year and is he going to stay for next season? There's a question mark there, and we've talked about that in a previous primetime podcast. But the big question for after this season will be, will Deondre Francois stay? If he stays, then we can look at Florida State and go, hey, Lamar Action Jackson's not there. Clemson might not have a quarterback that they're confident in like they were with Deshaun Watson coming into last season. It may just be, hey, this is the perfect storm for Francois. But if he leaves, if he goes ahead and leaves and Lamar Action Jackson leaves, man, this whole entire ACC conference could just be thrown up into the air. Because, I mean, we got to play the games. It's like Mark said on the onside kick this past week. We got to play this season, and this season will kind of dictate where we get heading into the next one. But at this point, God, if he leaves and Lamar Action Jackson leaves, this ACC conference might need some new faces at that quarterback position to kind of grapple everything a hold, because North Carolina lost their face, Clemson lost their face, Louisville could lose their face, and Florida State could lose their face as well. Do you have any final thoughts on this before we wrap it up?
I think that it's going to be pretty tough for Francois to be able to do it this year. I think it's going to be pretty tough just because of all the other factors around it. Mm-hmm. Cook's gone. I think that's a big one. I think that's a big one. Cook's gone. The offensive line isn't that consistent, and the defense is bad against the pass, and they've shown it. I think all those things, you can't just pin it on one guy and say, well, Francois's got to pick him up and do it every time. It's just not going to happen.
Well, and it looks like all the pressure, to me, most of the pressure to fill that Dalvin Cook role is going to be with the new Florida State guy coming into the role, and that's Cam Akers. He's going to be the guy that Florida State leans on, and can he be? He was rated the 9th in the nation for the 2017 signing class, and he led all rushers in the Florida State spring game with 87 carries on 10. He's going to be the guy that they look to fill that hole. But this is where we're going to flip it on to you guys, and let us know down below, Florida State fans, let us know, what do you guys think? Does Deondre Francois have the snuff to get you guys back to the college football playoff? How do you see this year starting, this year going? And really the big question I'm going to ask you, because you guys probably got annoyed with me most of the segment. Do you look at that Alabama game as an 0-1 hole, or do you look at it as, can Francois come out and lead this team to a win over the Alabama Crimson Tide week 1 to start the season? Let us know down below in the comment section.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed a lot of emotion. If you want more, click this video right over my left shoulder. You will certainly not regret it.